you either enjoy consuming fish or enjoy observing our ocean's wildlife. These experiences may soon just become memories of your past. Fish are a staple part of many of our diets, and this is because of overfishing and because this resource is made so readily available to us. Today, I will be persuading you to become an advocate for overfishing. I will be doing this by first explaining to you how overfishing is made possible by not making proper rules and regulations to restrict fish stocks and the fishing of those fish stocks. Then I will be explaining to you which fish species are being targeted by overfishing, why they're being targeted, and why we need to stop targeting them now before they go extinct. And finally, I will be explaining to you how young people are the only ones capable of stopping this problem, and that we must act right now if we want to solve this problem and make sure that this resource is available to future generations. Past and present generations have implemented rules in hopes of regulating fish stocks, but many times these rules don't represent fish stocks today. An example of this is in Russia. In an article titled "The Present State of an Arctic Char Population in Lake Imandra Subjected to Overfishing," which was published in 2013, the author A.A. Lukin wrote, "The impact of amateur and sport fishing on fish stocks was not sufficiently studied and usually ignored on the territory of the Russian Federation." So this essentially means that the Russian Federation failed to realize that they had a available resource, Arctic char, living on one of their lakes, Lake Imandra, and because of this they did not make proper rules. This led to overfishing, and now Arctic char almost completely extinct there. We need to make sure that we realize what fish species are living where in our country so that we can make sure that we make rules that will prevent overfishing of those species. In another article titled "Changes in Size Composition in the Catches of Toothfish Dysoncinus elegonides as a Result of Long-Term Longline Fishing in the Region of South Georgia and Shag Rocks," which was published on February 2nd, 2006, the author K.V. Shust and A.N. Kozlov explained how fishermen laying lines at various depths when fishing for toothfish realized they were catching more immature fish at a shallower depth with shorter lines, and older fish and bigger fish at a greater depth with bigger lines. This has caused immature fish to being overfished, which led that toothfish species with almost no fish to reproduce, because immature fish are the only ones capable of reproducing and older ones cannot. We need to understand that taking immature fish out of any body of water can devastate a fish population, and we need to stop doing this right now before this happens to many other species around the world. I am an experienced fisherman myself, and I have experienced firsthand what overfishing looks like and how it can devastate any body of water regardless of how big or small it is. I have also realized what it has done to many species that I currently fish for, and how those fish species are rapidly declining. Many fish species around the world are victim to overfishing, and this is a problem that we need to solve right now before many species around the world continue to go extinct so much that we will be left with nothing in our oceans. In an article previously mentioned that discussed toothfish, K.V. Shust and A.N. Kozlov wrote, it seems to be very probable that the process of rejuvenation and respectively of a decrease in the population density and biomass of the population is irreversible in the case of the continued long-line fishing of toothfish. So essentially, this fishing technique was way too effective, and they outfished toothfish to the extent to where they're going to go extinct. They were overfished because they're easy to catch with that technique and were great eating. We need to stop fishing for fish based on these two reasons, or else many fish species around the entire world will go to extinct. In the other article that I previously mentioned about Arctic char in Lake Imandra, A.A. Lukin explains that in 1954, the total harvest of all char in that lake was equivalent to 15.4 tons. About 10 years later, between 1965 and 1969, the yearly harvest was only about 1.64 tons. Now this just goes to show you how dramatic overfishing can be, and how overfishing can just devastate a population of any fish in a very short amount of time. And we need to stop fishing in this rapidly, or else this will happen to many other species around the entire world. How many of us fail to understand what a privilege it is to be able to have freshly caught or frozen fish in almost any of our supermarkets? I know I take this for granted, and I think you do too. Today I've illustrated how overfishing is made possible by not properly implementing rules, what fish species are being targeted, and why they're being targeted, and why we need to stop fishing for those species right now. Now I will be explaining to you how us as young people are the only ones capable of solving this global problem. One way that we can stop overfishing is by simply implementing rules that restrict what fish species we can actively fish for and which ones we can actively eat. In an article titled "Sensitivity of North American Sturgeon and Paddlefish to Fishing Mortality," which was published in 1997, John Borum explains that fishing mortality means which fish species we can kill and eat out of a body of water, and if we just restrict fishing mortality to only a certain amount of species, we can regulate which species of fish are thriving in that lake and make sure that we can have this species be available for future generations. In another article titled Confidentiality Overfishing Effort Data Threatens Science and Management Process, which was published in 2012, H. Hintz and the other authors write about how people studying environmental science are crucial in being able to understand the natural resources that fish need, so that overfishing and fishing at all for that matter do not destruct those resources that fish need, so that that fish species can thrive. In an online article titled Former Australians of the Year Call for Sanctuaries to Save Marine Life that was published in 2011, the author Tim Norton writes about how 4 former Australians of the Year made a letter to the Prime Minister when they became aware that proper sanctuaries in the oceans were not being implemented, and this led to many fish species not being able to reproduce. We need to implement many sanctuaries in all of our oceans so that this does not happen, so that we can continuously rejuvenate and rejuvenate these fish species. Today I've informed you about overfishing to persuade you to become an advocate for this global problem, because we need to act on this now before it is too late and the damage is irreversible. First, I have explained to you how overfishing is occurring and why we need to have better rules and regulations so that it does not continue to happen. Then I explained to you what fish species are being targeted, why they're being targeted, and why it is harmful to target those fish species, because they will go extinct. Finally, I explained to you the actions that we need to take to make sure this does not continuously happen. It is a privilege to have access to freshly caught or frozen fish in any of our grocery stores, and if we do not realize this, the impacts of overfishing will be too great to recover from. This resource of abundant fish is made available to us to the lack of rules and regulations, and because overfishing is occurring on many species around the world. Fish are a vital part of many different ecosystems around the world, and without them, many ecosystems would no longer exist. Fish are also important in cuisine, and many of our cultures would not be able to establish cultural practices without these fish. Hopefully this persuaded you in becoming an advocate for overfishing. Thank you.